The following podcast may not be for all listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
Guanajuato, Mexico is best known for its silver mines, which are situated above veins of silver that once fueled the empires of the past. For over 2 centuries, the Valenciana mine has produced almost a third of the world's silver. And even now, it continues to operate, its tunnels never quite empty. The city itself is a web of old mines, some of which are now eerie tourist attractions. Walk its twisted cobblestone alleys, and you'll see candy-colored buildings stacked like crooked teeth. It's almost as if you're viewing the pages of a storybook, until you remember what's buried in its history. If you visit and want to view something darker than the silver mines, there's always the Museum of Real Mummies waiting in the shadows. Welcome to Unexplained Realms, where we journey deep into the shadows, peeling back the layers of the world's most unsettling mysteries. I'm your host, Anne, and in this episode, we descend beneath the sun-baked streets of Guanajuato, Mexico, a place where the dead refuse to rest and the past waits in the gloom. You might think you know what a mummy is. You picture linen-wrapped pharaohs, silent crypts, and ancient curses. But the mummies of Guanajuato are nothing like the relics of Egypt. Here, the dead stare back at you, mouths frozen mid-scream, eyes wide, flesh twisted in an agony that time could not erase. But who were the Guanajuato mummies before death claimed them? For 2 centuries, the disease cholera has stalked the living, a relentless shadow slipping across borders, snatching lives, and leaving only emptiness behind. In 1833, Mexico was trapped in its own cholera hell. Medicine was guesswork, fear was the only certainty, and people died faster than anyone could count. Cemeteries overflowed, and when there was no more space for the dead, they turned to mass graves, long, raw trenches for the anonymous, the forgotten, the cursed. Cholera is ruthless. It's an infection that starts with a single microscopic invader and ends with bodies racked by agony. It doesn't wait. Sometimes it strikes within hours of exposure. Sometimes it lurks for days before making its presence known. Over the past 200 years, cholera has ignited 7 pandemics, each one clawing through towns and cities, piling up the dead until the last wave finally faded out in the 70s. But the disease never really leaves. It waits. War, disaster, the collapse of clean water. These cracks in society are all it needs to slip back in, quiet and ravenous. There were rumors barely spoken about, but impossible to ignore, of horrors worse than the disease itself. Bodies lowered into the dirt before death had finished its work. Ignacia Aguilar's story turned into a kind of nightmare legend. She suffered from cholera, but also a peculiar illness that slowed her heartbeat, causing it to stutter and sound as if it had stopped. One day, her heartbeat slowed to a barely noticeable beat for more than a day. They pronounced her dead and buried her deep. But in cholera's cold shadow, death is never straightforward. It's a door that sometimes swings back open. By 1851, the cholera epidemic had faded, leaving the dead in uneasy peace. That calm was short-lived. In 1865, the authorities slapped a maintenance tax on burial grounds, a 5-year fee for keeping the dead cared for. For the poor, it was a cruel joke. Some families had vanished altogether, leaving no one to pay their debts. Graves went unpaid, and the bodies beneath them were dragged from the earth and stacked like forgotten luggage in a storage house. No cemetery was spared. At Santa Paula, the exhumed corpses revealed their secrets in the most gruesome way. Thanks to the climate, the soil, and the occasional airtight crypt, many were mummified. Skin withered and drawn tight, hair and burial clothes stubbornly clinging to what was left. They didn't look ready for peace. They looked like they'd waited to be disturbed. The first to be pulled from the earth was Dr. Remigio Leroy, a French traveler buried in the Pantheon of Santa Paula. His remains were tucked away in a storage building, an unsettling start to what would become a grim collection. As more bodies were exhumed and stacked inside, the cemetery workers saw an opportunity. For a handful of pesos, anyone could come inside and view the mummified dead. The macabre display drew crowds, and before long, the building had morphed into one of the region's biggest tourist attractions. Remember Ignacia, the woman with the slow heartbeat? When she was exhumed, her body told a horrifying story. Her arms were twisted above her head, her face marked with frantic scratches. It looked like she'd woken in the dark, buried alive, and fought desperately to escape. The skin on her arm was bitten, and the blood somehow remained frozen in time. Researchers believe she didn't die from illness, but from suffocation. Her final moments spent clawing for air that never came. By 1958, a law was finally passed, putting an end to the practice of digging up the dead, but the damage was done. The museum still houses more than 100 of the original mummies. Men, women, children, even infants. Their deaths run the spectrum from stabbing and drowning to the haunting case of a 6-month-old fetus lost after its mother died of cholera. When the museum empties and the lights go dark, the living aren't the only ones left behind. Security guards talk of footsteps echoing through the halls, the faint wail of babies, disembodied voices, and shadows slipping between the glass cases. The noise and shapes are bad enough, but there's one mummy that's said to be worse than all of the rest. A woman named Carmen. In life, she was branded a witch, someone who'd bargained her soul with the devil for eternal youth. Her fate matched the legend, buried alive and left to become a curse that lingers long after death. Like most of the other mummies, Carmen was buried in the Santa Paula Cemetery and later exhumed and placed in the Guanajuato Museum. Once on display, staff noticed she did not remain in her case. They would often find Carmen in various places outside her display in the museum. Eventually, they placed chains around the display to help keep Carmen inside. They say if you ever stand in front of Carmen's glass case, you should never look her in the eyes, because she'll curse you. Some visitors swear they've left her display with fresh scratches on their skin and marks they can't explain. Mexican authorities have now stated that the legend of Carmen the Witch is most likely untrue, and Carmen deserves a dignified burial. She wasn't a witch, just a woman who now deserves a proper and dignified burial. Still, you have to wonder, with so many lost souls trapped behind glass, is it any surprise that footsteps echo after midnight? Or that voices linger in the dark? Maybe the museum is haunted by the restless dead, or perhaps it's just stories and shadows. Either way, some things are better left to the unexplained realms. Thanks for joining me in the dusty crypts and delving into some seriously creepy history. The Guanajuato Mummies would haunt anyone's thoughts after visiting the museum. So if you're trying to play it safe, check out the 1972 film about them instead. It's a little cheesy, but you'll probably sleep with one eye open tonight instead of two. If you like this episode, hit the subscribe button and leave a comment so the shadows know where to find you. Until next time, take care, stay weird, and may your nightmares keep you company.